Hi, I'm Lynn Pedotto with Adapt Chicago Productions. Today we have with us Scott Nance, who is the Community Support Coordinator at Access Living. Scott just returned from a trip to Egypt, and he is here to tell us about what he discovered. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Lynn. Thanks for having me.
So you went to Egypt through a professional fellowship program through the Department of State. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. So the State Department funds a program called Hands Along the Nile. And what Hands Along the Nile does is involves Chicagoans who work in disability-related areas of living, whether it be education, in-home community supports, vocational, all kinds of different things, and sends them to Egypt to learn about how disability issues are impacting Egyptians with disabilities. In turn, this HANDS program also sends people from Egypt to Chicago, and they get to see what life is like here for people with disabilities and learn about what we do here.
What is life like for people with disabilities in Egypt?
Life for people with disabilities living in Egypt is, I think, hard. It's just very, very difficult. They have a lot of issues. In Egypt in general, they have a lot of issues. People living in Egypt are dealing with instability in their government and a certain amount of violence and the unknown, just simply the unknown. I spoke with a man with disabilities in Cairo, and he spoke of the difficulty he had just even finding a wife because he lost his arms in an accident while on the job. And with the way that their culture works, none of the fathers, none of the mothers wanted their daughter to be with a man who they thought couldn't provide. He did finally find a woman who was strong enough to defy her parents and marry this man. They have a child, and he wakes up and goes to bed every morning and every night very afraid for what's going to happen the next day, not knowing what's going to happen the next day in his country and the future for his daughter. He has a genuine fear for this. So there are differences too that I discovered while I was in Egypt, and differences between cultural values of Egyptians with disabilities and Egyptians in general and Americans. And that would be, Americans value the individual. Egyptians really seem to value a community.
And so that affects how people with disabilities are treated, basically.
Yeah. Culturally and religiously, there are barriers for Egyptians with disabilities. Many of them who don't know their rights because they live in isolated parts of the country, or they are illiterate. There's an extraordinary amount of illiteracy across Egypt, and especially as it relates to Egyptians with disabilities. And this is a barrier. The religious and cultural identities, values can be a barrier as well. And so literally, many Egyptians with disabilities are hidden from the community by their families because the family has a certain amount of shame. Now, this may seem, and there is some similarity, I think, between what is currently happening in Egypt and even what happens today here in America. This same thing happens here in America. But I think that the context is that much more challenging in Egypt because they don't have an infrastructure. They don't have a stable government. They don't have laws explicitly protecting Egyptians with disabilities. The exciting thing is this has the potential to change.
So what is it going to take to change?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. It is going to take, well, I think it would take the same amount of time, perhaps longer, that it took us. It's taken us decades, and we're still not at the promised land. We're still not there here in America. And that was something that Egyptians didn't know. That was something that was learned by Egyptians from us. They thought Americans were living the dream, that the streets were paved with gold and that everybody had their rights, including people with disabilities. And what they found out was we have struggles too. We are not perfect here as well. But there, well, taking Chicago, for example, there's, including Chicagoland and the suburbs, there's upwards of 8 million people. In Cairo alone, there's 22. million people
Wow.
living in Cairo. And they estimate, and it's hard to determine the validity of these numbers, but they estimate that there's upwards of 7 million Egyptians living in Cairo with disabilities.
Okay.
So it's a completely astronomical difference. It is an extraordinary difference of what is happening here in America and what's happening there in Egypt. What I am so hopeful for as it relates to Egyptians with disabilities is that they have an opportunity. They have an opportunity to learn from our mistakes and to create a constitution, to create a government where disability rights are explicitly a part of the foundation of their government and their constitution, whereas we have had to add things on and do Band-Aids here and there, and it's still a struggle.
So they can start basically with just start from scratch, and they can create it so that it's actionable, it's cohesive from the beginning.
Right.
So going back when you said that about the rights and that they don't know their rights, is that something, a movement that is taking hold of in Egypt? The fact that people with disabilities do have rights, they have rights to be out in public, they have rights to a job, to marry, in your example. Is that becoming more and more mainstream?
Not unlike the history of Americans with disabilities living in this country, grudgingly, slowly, painfully, but yes, absolutely. There are individuals living in Egypt who are working tirelessly, who are going from community to community and spreading the word and educating and promoting not just disability rights, but civil rights across the board. Because we're not just talking about Egyptians with disabilities, we're talking about Egyptian women, we're talking about Egyptian children, we're talking about Egyptians across the board. So it is much more even than just disability issues. But disability, again, not unlike here in America, is very easily overlooked, is very easily overlooked. And when we talk about unemployment, when we talk about homelessness, when we talk about illiteracy, the percentage is heads and tails above any other identifiable group as when it pertains to people with disabilities. Employment rates here, as it relates to people with disabilities, terrible. Like what, 85% perhaps, something like that, unemployment rate. In Egypt, the employment rate, not including government jobs, and I'm actually kind of confused on that part, but not including government jobs, I think, it's 0.04% Egyptians with disabilities are employed.
Wow.
That's less than 1%.
And of course they struggle as a country because there is just amongst the mass population, people aren't educated, they're illiterate. So even it must make it an even greater obstacle for people with disabilities to overcome because their country as a whole is hurting.
Very true. Very true. The revolutions recently in 2011 and then again in 2013 have complicated things as it relates to disability legislation and stability of a government, but it has also provided a voice. It has provided an opportunity not just for Egyptians with disabilities, but all Egyptians to yell and to scream and to take to the streets and to say, our voices will not be denied. And this is a very powerful thing, and Egyptians with disabilities are being included in this chorus of voices singing for freedom. But even in the face of all of this, even in light of this constant struggles and the unknown and the instability, they passed in 2009, I believe, the United Nations treaty for people with disabilities. The same treaty that the United States has signed on to but did not ratify, failed to ratify by 7 votes here recently. And one of them was our own Senator Kirk. He recently has changed his mind, and now Illinois' 2 senators are both signed on for this and ready to help ratify it. But Egyptians had done this back in 2009, even when Mubarak was still in power. But it hasn't been able to take root the laws embedded within this treaty as it relates to Egypt have not been able to take root because there's no foundation for this legislation to take root. So, but they're ready though. They're ready. And they have been working tirelessly to collect data, to educate the population. And one thing that Americans can do to help with this is to call their state senator and say, sign on to this UN treaty. Sign on to this. And the United States has never signed on to any UN treaty like that, a United Nations treaty, not when it regards queer rights, not when it is related to children's rights, women's rights. The United States has never signed on to anything like this. And so it's an extraordinary precedent that would be broken, but the feedback I get from Egyptians and Egyptian leaders in this movement are the United States is a beacon. The United States is looked to as an example of democracy.
So in the last couple of seconds, are you hopeful for Egypt overall?
I'm extremely hopeful for Egypt. I think that they have a wonderful opportunity. It is going to take them years, if not decades. But to be quite frank, I think they have an opportunity to leapfrog us as an example of what can be done for people with disabilities.
Well, thank you so much, Scott, for joining us and just letting us know what's going on half a world away, and also how here in the States, just by calling our congressman and our senator and asked him to ratify this treaty on disability rights. So thank you. And this is Lynn Pedotto with Adapt Chicago Productions. Thank you for joining us today. Have a great one.
The state has created some new rules about the home services program, and some of those new rules have made it harder for consumers to direct their own services and to have the control that they need. And ADAPT has had 4 meetings with state officials to try to discuss those problems and stuff. And with the state, we've had some success in addressing the problems, but the local offices haven't been going along with the program. So that's why we're here at the local office protesting.
In the state of Illinois, there has been an effort to privatize services by creating programs and policies that take away options, choices, rights, the voices of people with disabilities in Illinois. And this is a very scary trend. And Chicago ADAPT has been meeting with Michelle Sadler at the Department of Human Services and David Hansen, who works in the Division of Rehabilitation Services. And David Hansen supervises all of the local DRS offices, DRS standing for Division of Rehabilitation Services. And these meetings have been very fruitful. We have spoken about mandatory criminal background checks for in-home personal attendants. We have spoken about issues related to the electronic visit verification, the new privatized PA clock in, clock out timesheet process. We have been discussing imminent mandatory registries for in-home personal attendants, as well as imminent mandatory training for our in-home personal attendants. And some of this is to determine integrity of the program. This is to deal with supposed fraud, of which I have seen little data to confirm this, and to protect people with disabilities who can't seem to make choices for themselves, to protect people from themselves, and again, to take away our rights. So these meetings have been very fruitful with Michelle Sadler and David Hansen. However, we realized a wrinkle. We realized a problem, that the local Division of Rehabilitation Service offices in the community who actually perform first-hand service to the community seem to have made up rules all for themselves, a kingdom unto themselves without consequence. So Chicago ADAPT went to a local Division of Rehabilitation office on Friday in March at 5050 North Broadway, near Argyle and Broadway. And we demanded, access to the office manager and to demand a meeting with this office manager, as well as all office managers from all local DRS offices across the city in Cook County to meet with Chicago Adapt and David Hansen in particular, so that we can all be on the same page. Because we cannot have all these things going on where local DRS offices are doing what they want while Chicago Adapt and David Hansen and Michelle Sadler are having conversations but no action. So we were there for a few hours, and in some of the photos and video that you will see here, there is access being taken by Chicago Adapters, taking over the building to a certain degree and making demands, listing our demands. We were very disciplined, we were nonviolent, and we were direct. And we got success. In fact, the police were called in, Chicago police officers were on the scene, and they came long enough to determine that we were in fact peaceful, nonviolent, as well as organized and disciplined. They came, they saw, they laughed, and they left. We were left alone with the Division of Rehabilitation Service officers who were in the building. They had no manager on site because they too have been in flux. They just moved from the Hiawatha office by Cicero off by the highway way west. So they're still moving in, but even their location is not accessible. They didn't have a room to accommodate us, so we were just sitting there in the hallway. But we're very organized, and we got our meeting. And that meeting will be on April 1st. From 2:30 to 4:30 at a site to be determined. If you are interested in this and other future events related to this issue, please contact me, Scott Nance, at ssnance@hotmail.com. Email is the best way to get a hold of me. So that's what's happening in Chicago Adapt. Free our people.
I am with the home service program as a client, yes.
And what's been your experience with it?
Well, certainly overall, you know, they mean to do a good job. Sometimes things get lost in the translation.
Okay. Now, when you say they get lost in the translation, what happens? Can you give us an example of that?
Too many cooks, not enough Indians, I guess. It seems that if I have an issue, it's very hard to get resolved.
Oh. And you have to wait a long time then?
Yeah, I approached them saying that I needed to change my PAs and that I would like to try and expedite the new one. I brought the forms I thought were complete in. Instead of calling me and saying they're not, they threw them in the mail and I got them a week later, thus delaying me another week for changing PAs because my original PA needed a vacation. So.
Okay, now do you have any last comments you'd like to make?
Well, certainly it's a great idea. I appreciate the help, but certainly they need to cross their T's and dot their I's a little bit better and do the job right or don't do it at all.
Okay.
Simple as that.
Very good.
Not a problem. Here you go.
Hi, it's Lynn Pedotto with Adapt Chicago Productions, and today I am with Lauren Johnson, who is with Be the Match. Lauren, what is Be the Match?
Be the Match is an organization that helps connect patients in need of a bone marrow transplant with potential life-saving donors.
And you're here today to?
We're here today to recruit new members to the registry. To join the registry, you just have to be between the ages of 18 and 44, in general good health, and willing to donate to anyone in need.
Okay, and how has the turnout been today?
Today it's a little bit slower. We've got a couple of people joining. One of the things we definitely have to do is dispel the myths and rumors about joining the registry and what that involves. It's not as scary as people think. It's only a cheek swab and a consent form to join.
Oh, that's great. So how long will the whole process take?
From start to finish, maybe 10 minutes, just depends on how fast you write.
Oh, okay. So filling out the application is faster than the actual test?
Absolutely. The actual test is about 40 seconds in total.
Wow.
Yes.
So why are there all these myths that it's takes too long, or what are the myths?
Well, the actual donation process, a lot of people think donating marrow is going to be scary and extremely painful. If you were called to donate marrow, there are actually two ways you donate. The first way is called a peripheral blood stem cell collection, which is a PBSC, which is less invasive and doesn't require much pain at all.
Oh, so it's not scary. So people definitely need to come out and register. And
be on the match.
Absolutely. Come. Yep.
And I am actually, Lauren is going to swab my cheeks for the camera, and I'm going to sign up for the match right now.
Awesome.
As the music plays in the background.
Now we do the other side. That's it. Simple, simple.